It's been a long road. Getting from there to here. It's been a long time. Too long, quite frankly. But that time's finally here. We see the counter hit quadruple digits at last. But I will not touch the sky. It's just too high for me and I don't like heights. But yes, here we are. The big 1000. How did we get here? Or rather, why did we get here? I haven't a clue. But regardless, here we are. Big milestone occasion. So we might as well celebrate as we usually celebrate things around here. Underwhelmingly so. Baseball Simulator 1000 is a game made by Culture Brain for the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1990 and is a translation of the 1989 Famicom game Chojin Ultra Baseball. Baseball Simulator 1000 was regarded as one of the great baseball video games of the early days and had spawned quite a successful series of titles. Unfortunately, I was not able to appreciate this game much because I'm not a fan of baseball and was never really into baseball video games in the first place, so... Hey, I do like that there's a watch option and you can watch the games play out, and you do have a choice of fields to play in, including one in space, and that makes me rather happy. So that's the joke review that only one person is going to get, and I hope they're happy now because that's all you're going to get out of me as far as baseball is concerned. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, let's get on to the actual subject matter of today's video, which I alluded to in the previous video, but if you haven't seen it or you haven't figured it out, here's an old clip to clue you in on to what we're reviewing today. Dragon Warrior 4 for the NES, or as I like to call it in context to the rest of the collection, this is number 1000. Yeah, with this added to the tally, my game collection has officially hit 1,000 physical games. Dragon Warrior 4, released originally in 1990 for the Nintendo Family Computer as Dragon Quest IV: The Chapters of the Chosen, and later localized for North American audiences in 1992 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, the final game in the Dragon Quest/Warriors series to grace the NES before the series migrated over to the Super Famicom, as well as the final game in the series to grace North American audiences for quite some time until the release of Dragon Warrior Monsters for the Game Boy Color in 1999. It's also worth noting that despite the 2-year gap, Dragon Warrior 4 didn't undergo a whole lot of changes between regions, mostly some name changes and mild bits of censorship as expected, but that's about it really. Dragon Warrior 4, as you've seen 10 years ago, was the 1000th game added to the collection of sorts. It is also something of a personal holy grail, for lack of a better term, because it left a bit of an impression and... well, gather around kids, it's story time. Dragon Warrior 1 was a game that I bought at a flea market as a kid. Probably one of the first games I bought with my own money. Whatever money I had saved up over who knows how long. And I remember it only cost me about 20 bucks. It was a game that I enjoyed tremendously, despite its quirks. Dragon Warrior 2 came along later and I enjoyed that one as well. Dragon Warrior 3, I never got to play until recent years, but this is stuff I've already talked about in the last video. And as I sort of mentioned in the last video, Dragon Warrior 3 was a game that I played so I could get to this game. I never owned a copy of Dragon Warrior 4 as a kid, but I did get to play it ever so briefly. Like most games I've played around the 90s, it was a rental at a video store and I was looking forward to it. Unfortunately, that weekend I rented the game was also when a personal tragedy struck and I wasn't able to play as much of the game as I would have liked. What little I played gave me a sense of wonder and hope to an otherwise dark period that I desperately needed at a time. The next morning I brought the game back to the video store, promising myself to give it another rental down the line, only for the game to be gone from shelves on my next visit. And that game would elude me for the next 20 years. Never played it again since that time, not even during the period where I was dabbling in what I would jokingly call the evil art of emulation did I consider giving this game another shot. To do it on anything but the proper hardware with the actual cartridge felt disingenuous and inauthentic. Now, Dragon Quest IV eventually got an enhanced remake on the original PlayStation. It was supposed to be released here, but never was. Years later, there was another remake for the Nintendo DS that I did play, and that's a fine remake, by the way, bringing about a number of upgrades to make the experience more manageable for modern tastes, but it wasn't quite the same thing. And then one day, during one of my rounds at the flea market, I saw a copy of Dragon Warrior 4 on sale for the NES, and what can I say? I knew I had to get it. Didn't matter that it set me back $100, this was the holy grail as far as I was concerned. The one game that had teased me with greatness and eluded me for close to 2 decades, and at last I had my hands on it. Coincidentally, Dragon Warrior 4 turned out to be the 1000th physical video game purchase added to my collection, and yes, I did count, and yes, I made a video announcing this fact. And that's as far as I went, however. I wouldn't touch the game for several more years, and there were 2 trains of thoughts for this. First off, before I could dabble in the one game, I knew I needed to play the ones that came before. Sure, I could jump straight to 4 without playing the others, but that would have felt like a bit of a cheat. But the other train of thought was that as I continued this video review thing for reasons that are beyond my feeble comprehension, I don't know why I'm doing this still, but I knew that if I ever reached 1,000 reviews, if I ever got to that quadruple digit mark, this would be the game that would get the nod. In some ways, it made the most sense, the 1000th review covering the 1000th game purchase. Considering the ground that needed to be covered before that point, gave me more than ample time. Now, I will admit that if it had not been for occasional prevailing circumstances over the years, we would have gotten to this point a hell of a lot sooner than we did, but we're here now, finally. And now that we got that exceedingly long bed-setting, possibly padding segment out of the way to provide a bit of contextual perspective or something or other to the table, let us finally dive into Dragon Warrior 4, aka Dragon Quest IV, aka number 1000. Dragon Warrior 4 represented a drastic shift in the series. It was leaving behind the world of Erdrick and Alefgard in favor of a new realm. It would introduce and refine various gameplay elements and craft an adventure much grander in scope than any that had come before it. To say that it was something of an ambitious game would be an understatement. You don't even get to play your named hero until much later down the road, because Dragon Warrior 4 has you playing through 4 chapters, spotlighting different characters in different walks of life who would eventually serve as the hero's allies when the time eventually came. Chapter 1, The Royal Soldiers, placed you in the role of loyal soldier Ragnar, charged with the task of seeking out and rescuing the missing children of his kingdom from an ominous evil presence. Chapter 2, Princess Elena's Adventure, focused on tomboyish Princess Elena, who longs for adventure and ends up getting more than she bargained for. Chapter 3, Talun the Arms Merchant, we're using the NES names by the way, obviously, is the story of traveling merchant Talun and his efforts to run a successful business and make a shit ton of money. And Chapter 4, The Sisters of Mombaraba, is the story of 2 sisters seeking to avenge the death of their father at the hands of a former student who's gone bad, and you have no idea how many times I've struggled to get that name out without fumbling. Can I play with the dog? Can I take him with me? Poor little thing's got no master. He seems to like me. Hey, look, he's following me along. Maybe I could take him with me on my journey. Oh, no. Oh, okay, never mind. Probably would have lasted longer than the other guy that would join you, but I digress. Whatever. All these chapters at first seem like separate stories featuring different folks with seemingly nothing to do with each other, and while it might be that, each chapter leaves behind breadcrumbs of world building and developing the main story of this 4th Dragon Quest, By the end of each chapter, our heroes head out into the world, destined to come together in the game's fifth and final chapter, The Chosen Ones, which is where we finally get to play our main hero or heroine of this game. Yes, Dragon Warrior 4 originally had 5 chapters. Subsequent remakes would add a prologue as well as a 6th and final chapter to flesh things out. Great for those who wanted an after story, but yeah, no. This game does enough fleshing out. 5 chapters is more than sufficient, thank you very much. The neat thing about all this is that each chapter feels different or distinct enough to make it worthwhile. The first chapter is the lone soldier fulfilling his given mission against an evil force, almost harkening back to the first Dragon Warrior, except your opposition come in wider numbers, and there's also an optional NPC that you could seek out to help you out. Chapter 2 is pretty much a mirror of the second game, the bare-knuckle fighting princess and her 2 magic-wielding companions, except much shorter, and instead of a big bad waiting for you at the end, you're fighting a gauntlet of opponents. Chapter 3 is living the life of the working man, going to work, making a living, earning a daily wage, getting a fresh lunch every morning, eventually getting a permit to own and operate your own shop, meaning you'll have to acquire stock, either by getting it from other shops or winning random encounters where item drops occur much more frequently compared to the rest of the game, and that stock is sold for more than what you paid for, and somehow you're still in business, until you're eventually off to greener pastures, at which point the chapter ends and we move on to the sisters seeking vengeance, which probably packs the more emotional punch. Once again, the core gameplay remains the same. You guide your party around fighting monsters to grind for experience points to increase your levels, as well as gold to purchase wares such as weapons, armor, supplies, or maybe you fancy a gamble in the local casino, explore caves, towers, other places for loot to plunder, and possibly key items to advance the story forward a bit. Most of your actions are done through selecting commands from menus, and once again, you're still limited to 8 item slots per character, including any weapons, armor, and such that you've equipped, which makes item management on the road a bit of a hassle, though much like the previous game, there is a vault function where you can store your excess goods and gold, which is always nice. There are some changes, of course, most notably the return of a door command, which lets you open doors, some of which can be opened without a key. But regardless, this eliminates the need to fumble through item screens to find the right key to unlock a door. If you have a key in your possession that opens the door, you can open said door, no problem. While it's not quite as nimble as just walking through the door and having it open automatically, it's still a step up over what you had before. Saving your progress is now down to the House of Healing rather than conferring with royalty, which should give you more places to save your game, which is always nice to have, though not every House of Healing will offer to save your game. You can now search dressers and pots for items, and you may even find them, which means they serve more of a function than just mere window dressing, and thank fuck for that. You still can't search wells, however, that's a bit of a letdown. You have more means of transportation, your usual boat for sailing the seas, a balloon for soaring the skies, and a wagon to house all your allies, which is neat because while you're still stuck with a 4-member party for most dungeon or underworld segments, with the wagon on hand you could swap members on the fly. Would you rather have a more balanced party or go with a party setup that skews a certain way? You can do that, somewhat. Well, so far we've seen a couple improvements to the overall experience. You know, some changes for the better, that sort of thing. And then there's tactics. Dragon Warrior 4 brings about the biggest change to the battle system, and it's not a change you will immediately notice because in the first 4 chapters, battles play out as they have in past games. Monsters attack to suck you into a black void, and you dictate the actions of all your party members, whether to attack, cast spells, use items, etc. Sometimes you'll have non-playable characters join your party, and they're basically extra bodies who gain no experience and thus do not level up nor do they carry inventory. Other than these utility players who come and go, you have total control over the actions of your heroes. All that changes when Chapter 5 rolls around and brings about its tactics system. In what seems like an effort to streamline things, Dragon Warrior 4 only lets you control your main hero's actions while the rest of your party members are computer controlled, and your only means of influencing their actions is to select one of 6 tactics for them to follow, whether it be to conserve magic, go on the offensive, or whatever the case may be. I don't like the tactics system. Not only because it takes away control of your other party members, especially after a good chunk of the game gave you such control over those characters, but it doesn't particularly work well. To be fair, I find that tactics work best when you're using a mostly physical party. The non-magic users who hit really hard and thus their only action should be to attack because it saves a bit of repetition with the menus. Thing is, Dragon Warrior 4, much like the previous games, does not have an auto-targeting system, which means if two people pick the same target and one of them kills said target, the other is whiffing air, thus you're wasting a move. This leads to cases where you'll want to hit a monster but someone else lands the blow before you do, and thus your move is wasted. This does not occur often, but it does happen more often than I would like, and you have no way of knowing your partner's actions until they come into play. Another issue with the tactics system is in regards to magic users and their penchant for casting spells with seemingly no effect. Talon has his own set of actions that usually come into play, and sometimes they're beneficial, but they happen every so often and seemingly at random. These are actions that did not occur when you were playing Talon in Chapter 3, but all of a sudden, that's a thing. Now I could see some folks not minding something like this to speed up the grind in random encounters, couple choices here and there to keep things moving, but given the option, I'd much rather have full control over the party because at least then, any mistakes made in battle are due to my poor judgment rather than those of partners I have no control over. And this system apparently wasn't that popular with other folks either, because subsequent remakes of Dragon Quest IV would let you control your party normally, which is a nice option to have. That's the only real sour point. Everything else about the game is perfectly fine, I guess. The handy door option's nice to have rather than shuffling through keys and item boxes. Not ideal in the long run, but baby steps. There's also a side quest hunting for small medals that you later take to the Small Medal King, who will then reward you with a variety of valuable and somewhat useful items. Random battles are still a thing, and the grind is also still a thing. But they've always been a thing in this series, and if you stuck with it 4 games in, it's something you've gotten used to. It's part of the whole Dragon Questing warrioring experience, and I would be more than happy to take you back to your magic castle. Why are you telling me my group is foot? What do you mean you'll wait? You're asking me to take you back to your magic castle. I would be more than happy to do it, and you're gonna wait till my... you know what? I changed my mind. Fuck you. I'm going home. Dragon Warrior 4 retains the same tile-based visual presentation, the overall graphical style and such, but it's probably the best looking of the bunch. Sure, you've got some new character sprites and some new tiles of scenery that isn't a huge step up from what came before, but now there's animated water tiles in the overworld. As simple as it may be, it's actually a step up for this sort of thing. Dragon Warrior 4 also figured out how to build sizable buildings and huge castle exteriors, which includes sweet giant door opening animations that invite a sense of wonder and... never mind, it's just a neat little bit that I dig, and certainly a better take than Dragon Warrior 3's attempt at castles and whatever. Quite a bit of varied scenery making up these maps though. When it comes to battles, however, you're still largely fighting in black voids. And while there's a number of recycled monster designs from past games, as you would expect by this point, there are some new ones as well, and there's even some animated bits on here, such as all the little slimes converging to form a really big king slime, which is a simple but neat little effect. Of course, with a new game comes a new soundtrack to complement it, and the same batch of sound effects that have seen regular use since the first 2 games. There might be some new sounds implemented, but I've heard all those sounds before, but that's okay. You can reuse the same old sound effects for a billion games going forward on a billion different platforms. They have, let's be honest. So long as those sounds are complemented with a truly superb and wondrous score that takes you on that extended journey, and Dragon Warrior 4 achieves that. I will go so far to say that this is probably the best of the 4 games in terms of musical compositions. On the surface, it's not a huge leap above what came before. They still use the same instruments and style of compositions and melodies that the previous games used, but Look, I say this next bit with absolute honesty, and it's not something I will say often in regards to NES chiptunes, which often excel more with faster-paced, high-energy tunes than something that aims to evoke some sort of emotional, somber response. But this is one of those rare instances where the music kinda hits you in the feels, as the cool kids call it. The music in Dragon Warrior 4 is varied in emotional depth. You have a mellow, somewhat somber tune that evokes feelings of sadness, loss, and despair, a battle theme that is intense and nerve-wracking, a feeling that's lost when you convert this to a big orchestral piece and it becomes another one of those bits. Mysterious shrines have mysterious-sounding themes that make you ponder the mysteries of the universe or something. And of course, the air balloon is nice, quiet, admire the scenery, avoid all the monster encounters. The opposite of all those airship themes in the Final Fantasy games, which are often fast-paced, melodramatic musical numbers. Nothing against those songs, they're quite nice actually, I like a few of those. But sometimes I just like a quiet romp in my hot air balloon in the sky. Even though I'm never going to touch the sky because I don't like heights, but whatever. But it's the individual character themes that make the game for me. Each character has a unique overall theme that plays during their chapter or whenever they're leading the pack in the 5th chapter, and each theme evokes a different feel of sorts. Ragnar's theme, for example, is fairly stock overworld stuff, but Elena's has a rather upbeat feel that fits her tomboyish nature. The twins have a theme that befits their professions and desire for revenge, with the added touch of that opening dance number being the tune that plays out in battle if they're leading the party. The main hero gets 2 such themes, the first being a quiet, ponderous piece as you make your out into a world largely unknown to you mere moments after everything you knew was taken from you. And by the time your whole party is assembled, you get a new theme that is decidedly more heroic, adventurous, and fills you with a new sense of purpose. Out of all the overworld themes in these Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest games, this one in particular sticks with me the most. And out of the 4 NES games, the music of Dragon Warrior 4 is the one that hits that sweet spot best. Overall, Dragon Warrior 4... You know what? Fuck it. I don't care. I love this game. I don't say that often, but I'll say it here. I absolutely love this game. And it's been a long road to get to this point. A very long wait. And it was absolutely, positively, 1000% worth the wait. It's got that one nagging quibble in the AI-operated tactics system that keeps this game from being that perfect game, that seamless journey. Once you've learned to tolerate it, and that's as far as I'd go, I'd tolerate it, because the rest of the game is just fantastic. The story might not seem like the deepest of cuts, but it is engaging, and the way it's built up, giving each of the hero's allies their own spotlight and backstory for you to invest in well before the main event of them coming together and being led by the Chosen One. I've enjoyed that journey tremendously. I've enjoyed that each chapter was distinct and different enough. I like that each of the little side stories that you play would eventually get followed up on. It's more than what you would expect on the NES. And it's for this reason alone why it sort of pleases me. This on any other platform, even the 16-bit platforms, this would have been the norm. On the NES though, it's something exceptional. And gameplay-wise though, it's probably the most refined of the 8-bit Dragon Quest. The presentation is in top form, the gameplay is fairly engaging and somewhat streamlined, not quite as far as it could have been, but still a far cry from that first game. The soundtrack is simply superb. Most of all, it was an enlightening journey with twists and turns that kept me engaged from beginning to end. And there are very few RPGs I will say that about, especially these days when free time is a bit of a premium, but Dragon Warrior 4 hit that sweet spot for me. This game is phenomenal, a pure joy to experience in spite of its notable warts. There are remakes that came out later to make the experience palatable. Nintendo DS version, which I've played, and that's probably as good a remake as you'll get with that game, and one that I highly recommend. It's really good. But this NES version of Dragon Warrior 4, much to my surprise and joy, held up its end quite nicely. One of the highlights in the NES library and a fitting end of an era in Dragon Quest lore, as the next game would grace the 16-bit Super Famicom, and that series would largely remain in Japan until the release of Dragon Quest Monsters and 7 and all that jazz. But that's another story. to be told by somebody else. And that's the end of the road, kids. It's been a fun ride, but we've reached the end, and now that we're here, well, I'm going to bed. So, thank you for joining me on this long-ass journey. Extra special thanks if you actually stuck through the whole thing. I don't know why, but thank you for that. But yeah, until next time, take care, be safe, and good night. I'm going to bed. Bye.